Hi, everybody. We're thrilled to be here. The Canadian Purpose Economy Project started as a series of conversations perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, and we engaged lots and lots of people across the country in all sorts of different sectors talking about the role of business in society and the role that each business could take in improving community and improving our planet rather than merely managing the negative impacts that businesses often have. And it's a project that aims to lift up social purpose across Canada and to present an example for the world. What is this social purpose thing? What are we talking about when we talk about social purpose? And the narrative goes like this. Logic 1 really comes out of the Milton Friedman school and the Chicago school and the neoliberal ethic around the role of business. And it says that the role of business is to generate profits for shareholders. Simplistic, very clear, but we know the negative impacts of businesses can be really detrimental to our planet, to our communities, and so sustainability movement began to get us into Logic 2, where we start to think about businesses taking responsibility for things that were just held as external to the function of the business before, right? Environmental footprint, GHG emissions, water use, waste use, all of those things that we think of in environmental sustainability, and then more recently in the social impacts of business. Right? Are we paying attention to the communities where our staff live, where our customers live? Are we looking after our customers? Or are we only looking after shareholders? So this Logic 2 feels more like the stakeholder economy, where we're really thinking about stakeholders, human and non-human. And what we're encouraging you to think about with Logic 3 and the purpose paradigm is, what if the role of business in society is actually to improve the long-term well-being of people on the planet? What if it's not good enough merely to manage the negative side effects of business, but if it's really, really important instead to think of your business, as B-Lab puts it, as a force for good, right? To use the business to deliver solutions to the challenges that we face in our communities and as a planet. Dr. Hurth's work, as now documented in the British Standards Institute on Standard for Social Purpose Business, defines a social purpose business as one that pursues an optimal strategic contribution to the long-term well-being of all people on the planet. So optimal meaning it's optimized for the size and the scale and the reach and capacity of the enterprise. Strategic meaning it is controlled by the senior-most authority in the business and it is intertwined with the strategy of the enterprise. And a contribution recognizing that there are big problems that no one organization is going to solve, but each organization must make a contribution to the long-term well-being of all people on the planet. So that's all that we're trying to do. As the Canadian Purpose Economy Project, all we're trying to do is change the role of business in society. It should take us 6 months, figure. But what if by 2030, 25% of Canadian businesses had articulated a social purpose, authentically embedded it in their operations, were disclosing their progress on that social purpose to stakeholders, and were collaborating with peers and community to achieve it? What if? That's our vision. And we picked 25% because we believe that's a tipping point beyond which social purpose business will be the norm in our communities. One of the signature pieces of work that we've done over the course of the last year is to work with a number of the highest profile chief executives in the country to articulate a letter from CEOs to CEOs, encouraging them to take up a social purpose and embed it in their businesses. Thanks, everybody. Welcome, Coro Strandberg.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for making your way to this beautiful spot. Have any of us traveled a very long way to change the world, right? And here we have Victoria Hurth, who's come from very far away to be with us here in British Columbia. She co-led the development of the International Standards Organization for the Governance of Organizations. Like, who would take on a project like that? So first the governance of organizations and then the purpose economy. Like, I wonder what she's going to do next. So then she went on and she wrote the world's first national standard in purpose-driven organizations, PAS 808. I'm sure she'll make mention of that. And she's also advised the UN on the methodology for sustainability reporting, SDG 12.6.1. She is going to, of course, share her thoughts about the role of profit in a social purpose company. And she's going to unpack the link between purpose and profit. So with that, drum roll. Come on, everybody, drum roll. Victoria, maybe you could just update us about the ISO and what's going on there, and then we're going to open it up to some broader other questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The reason why I do standards, it's part of my theory of change, because we need to build co-creative consensus building where we all have ownership and a sense of stake in some concrete clarification about what we're trying to do. And there is no better facility that exists than the system of national member bodies, of which there are 171 in the world. So the first national standard was built through the UK, using and by experts on behalf of the world. And now, and this is the exciting bit, our idea of governance was based around stock exchange codes and protecting investment for financial income for investors. So we have this history of which now, a week ago, we were told that the ballot that went out to say, should we take this British standard as a starting point and go into the process of bringing whoever of the 171 countries and liaisons want to be involved to create an ISO in purpose-driven organisation. No country voted against it. It was positively voted very easily, and we are going to be starting that work in September. And I am, again, just there to facilitate the drawing out of the consensus that over the last 30 years I see everywhere. So it is literally just a process of saying, okay, you use this term, you use that term, what one can we agree on? Remember, all of this is for any type of organisation, including government as an organisation. It is an invitation for you all to be involved. This is for the world to co-create, and whilst we'll, at the end of it, get, I hope, an even better version of the British standard. This is the geeky bit in the middle that actually technically makes sense and can drive the future that we want. In 2 years, the second most important thing, which I think is even more important, is that we get the world seeing each other, being part of a global community, that we realise that, because if we just sit and imagine, around the world, there are people gathering like us everywhere. They might be calling it different things. Let's see each other, because then we have a chance to do something about the status quo. Because if we're not clear what the destination looks like, we'll never bring it about.
Why is the relationship between purpose and profit so important to understand if you're in a business, if you're with capital markets, governments, regulatory systems? Why do we need to understand this?
The reason why purpose is powerful and why it's building is because it is the first concept that actually gets to the heart of the problem, and the problem is the profit motive. And I've seen over the last 30 years so many sustainability concepts come in, go, everyone goes, yeah, fantastic, and then it gets warped and changed, and it essentially becomes a tool of business as usual. Because if you put anything into a coherent system that is governed for a particular reason and try and help get it to change, you haven't got a hope in hell unless you change the governance system. And that's why the fact it's taken this long, but we're on a tipping point to be able to, as leaders, confidently embed what I'm about to summarize is what makes it powerful. Purpose puts very clearly the cart before the horse before the cart and says profits are a symbolic good. They only have a meaning in terms of the fact that they're the most beautiful. Money is the most beautiful resource because you can turn it into other things. It's like magic, right? It's wonderful. So whenever you're making any decisions about profit, you're making decisions ultimately about something else. But what we've done is said to business, your reason to exist is to optimize as much of this magic stuff as possible, extract it from a market and give it to a third party, in essence. What purpose does is say, profit is always a means to an end. We're going to treat it like a means to an end in our organization, and our reason to exist is something that is meaningful meaning purposeful, purposeful meaning being in the good of the service, in service of the good of another. If you are in the service of the good of another, how can that not relate very specifically to long-term well-being for everyone? And so there we have our anchoring frame to say what purpose is and what profits isn't. The reason that Logic 1 is and the reason why all these other sustainability concepts have failed is because Logic 1 is about profit maximization. And if you try and say that the heart of a paradigm, heart of a logic is not true anymore, it's like cannot compute.
So why is this so hard to grasp? Like, we've kind of heard these ideas round and about, and why is it so difficult to grasp? And how is purpose changing then how we see profit?
And it's so implicit, we're talking about things that are just, 70, 100 years on of what is essentially been a cultural revolution. My son says the purpose of business is to make as much money as possible, isn't it? Obviously. Half he's winding me up, but half he believes it's the Alan Sugar effect. It's whatever you want to say. It's not. It's the Friedman effect. It's the creating ourselves a beautiful box that's so simple and simplistic that we can pretend that the real reality and all its complexity doesn't exist. And if we all say it's true, it's true. How beautiful and wonderful until 100 years on we realize that the very goal of the economy that this set of assumptions was supposed to be delivering, that the opposite has actually been delivered. And we would still continue not to take notice of it if we could, except now it is so far down the road. Our toes are over the cliff edge so far that these issues are through the doors, through the windows, through the floorboards, and we cannot ignore them anymore. So some people are fully in the purpose paradigm way of thinking things. And because they used to be in the business as usual, they can think like that as well and empathize with those that are. Then there are those that are sort of, straddling the two and flipping and going, yeah, I believe it when I'm in a room like this. And then it's like, that can't be true. So essentially, what profits mean in a purpose-driven organization are that they remind us that profits are fundamentally an excess of financial capital, right? And that then, in turn, reminds us that every single organization needs an excess of financial capital. Everyone. The definition of financial profit: monetary gain, especially the difference between the amount earned and the amount spent in buying, operating, or producing something. That's relevant for everybody. So when you remember that profits are a means to an end, and you understand that that's the definition of it, and then you remember that why do we need profits? We need profits and this is profits as a means to an end versus profits as a goal. For a business as usual, logic one organization, profits mean two things. It means maximizing, and it means profits as a means to an end. And they're two different functions in terms of how you govern, right? How you decide to go into a market, produce a product or service, communicate or whatever because you're trying to maximize profit, that's one set of strategic decision making. How you manage the stocks and flows of your financial capital so that you can maximize those profits is a different function, it's a different job. But when we talk about purpose and people say, yeah, but profits are important, I'm like, yeah, well, profits, of course they are. But as an optimizing objective or as a means to an end. And so what purpose does is say, not an optimizing objective, but absolutely a means to an end. Pay the bills, meet stakeholder expectations, including shareholders as stakeholders that have expectations about their return, and invest in the purpose. And that's why you need money. And you need enough of it to do those things. Think of profits and focus in on that stocks and flows of financial capital, as well as of course, and if anyone's seen the triangle, the bottom of the triangle, stocks and flows of non-financial capitals that underpin the stocks and flows of financial capitals, the health of the social and environmental systems, and the health of the stakeholders. But you see that profits result from those in order for you to be able to do those three key things in order to pursue your purpose. And once you've got those ducks in a row, and that really clear, everything else is just a logical conclusion of that.
Okay then, perfect segue. If you're a leader in a purpose-driven company, and hands up if you work for a purpose-driven company, just those folks, what profit questions would these people have? What should they be thinking about as leaders in a social purpose company?
If you get all of those ducks in a row, right? Now, I'm sure as purpose leaders, you either get them all completely, get them all most of the time, but certainly we'll meet people who are sort of flip-flopping and the conversation is a little bit blurred and confused. Yeah, am I right in that? Yeah. I would like to turn that question over to you. Given all of that, when you're making decisions about profit, what are the questions that you're asking yourself about profits? One of the key points, the key points, which is stakeholder expectations, right? And and then you unlock the understanding of so much of why it's hard or not to do purpose. So the question is, who are the powerful stakeholders in your system? What logics are they in? And therefore, what expectations do they have? Not just because of their logics, but because of their context. And what is your situation? So what is the expectation you can and cannot meet? What we don't realize is all our organizational decision making has gravity for human futures at this moment in time where we're on the edge. So what they did in OpenAI is create a system of capped returns. And that's what it is. If you become purpose-driven and therefore profits are a means to an end, and your purpose is an optimal strategic contribution, your reason to exist is an optimal strategic contribution to long-term well-being for all, shareholders cannot, and financial returns to them cannot be your optimizing goal. They just aren't by default. And that's what a lot of purpose-driven, but not really purpose-driven organizations get mixed up. And if that's the case, the first question is, well, how much do you need? And the more that you can persuade those financial investors to give you headroom for their expectation to be lower, and to have questions and conversations with them. So it's not just what are your expectations, it's like, what are your expectations if times are good? What's your but actually there's going to be a max, but you might have a sort of, a positive max and an actual floor. It'll never be more than this, right? But it might go up to here. But what happens if we're in a situation where strategically we are having to go against our purpose because times are tight? Are you willing to accept less? Under what conditions? Now, you can imagine having that kind of conversation. Firstly, you'll only get certain sort of shareholders, but you might need to then have that conversation and shift that. And that's why organizations, even like Apple and Paul Polman, they came and said, don't invest in us if you don't believe in our purpose.
How to decide what are the parameters for excess financial capital? Like, how would you decide what would seem to be a reasonable amount if you're that company?
You want to think about all your stakeholders, not just those that you have an obligation to legally or morally, but also, and in PAS 828, we have a list of 5 different categories of stakeholders, and you need to consider all of them in terms of, and some of those might, like nature, might not be present in the room, but the question is, how much do we have to divert to that in terms, so it's a board level conversation to say, what are the expectations that we need to set, want to set, where are our stakeholders at? But it will always be a negotiation. So when we talk about stakeholder capitalism and getting stakeholders in the room, I'd say probably the core thing that is stakeholders, instrumental stakeholders. So stakeholders that enable you to achieve your purpose. The question is, what makes them healthy? What do they need in terms of financial capital to be healthy? And how can you, and so those are the kinds of conversations you would have. What do we need to pay staff? Okay, what will they accept? What could we push them on? But what would we like to pay them? But you can't have that conversation on your own. You need to have stakeholders at the table. That doesn't mean they need to be on your board, but it does mean you need to have enough information to be able to understand what they need and set the expectations. Maybe their expectations are lower than they need. So you need to raise their expectations and say, no, we're going to give you this. But that is about what I'd call the bottom of the triangle in terms of minimum thresholds of healthy systems. Because that's the question you're asking in terms of those resources. What is the minimum that needs to be healthy for a shareholder, for a worker, for the supply chain, and so questions around contracting and what you do. That's all in terms of means to an end. Then there's the purpose. Now, that's what you exist for, which is what you're optimizing for, which means that in theory, anything above that threshold is absolutely got to go back into optimizing the purpose. And that's why you need to be obviously really clear about what that purpose is so that you know how to divert that. And I'd say the other key question would be also, what do we do if we're making too much money? In a purpose-driven organization, though, it's not as easy to just say, oh, well, we're making loads of money, that's great, we can reinvest in the purpose. Because maybe what that means is that you shouldn't be making so much money. Maybe you are lacking, there are opportunities in your business model that you're not optimizing, like the way that you price for things or what you're paying, that you shouldn't end up with that much money in the first place. So these are the sorts of really obvious questions for purpose-driven organizations and their boards, but which if you're not purpose-driven and this we just have to recognize, the hybridity situation that we are in the movement to a purpose-driven well-being economy.
You saw the hands that went up. Like, what would be a practical thing that they would take back to their organization or something? How would they operationalize it?
When we look at the laws that are coming through, we're essentially asking shareholders to give up their power autonomously. Now, they start to see the writing on the wall, which is the reason we even have a thing where B Corp and Public Benefit Act and Loi Pact, and around the world this is changing. But what we're saying is, well, the status quo is that you serve profit maximization for shareholders, and now we're going to add this other thing we're not even going to be that clear about. We're going to say doing social and environmental good or something similar. Now, I am all for that, as long as we all realize that is a horrible place to put an organization in, because you're saying serve two gods that are very, very different, and then just work out the strategic decision making that comes underneath that, right? That's fine if we know that it's not ideal and that the people who are doing that are purpose-driven are able to understand it as a route towards something that actually is going to be fully purpose-driven. So fully purpose-driven governance systems. For me, it's about diagnosis first, like realism. Now, if I was in a non-purpose-driven organization, set of people, that's what I would say. But it's true for all of us. Being really, really clear about where we are as an organization, how far towards being fully purpose-driven, which is what the British Standard and the ISO are there for, so that we can really push ourselves. And we've had organizations, there's an implementers group online, and people are working with that to create sort of spider diagrams of behaviors that they know that they're doing, those they're doing, but maybe not doing so well and not documenting. So there's something about just saying, how far from being where you'd want to be are you? Then why is it that you're not? And that would be often to do with that stakeholder context, and then having a plan to bridge from here to there. And that's why, I say to organizations, a lot of organizations feel that they're so surrounded and they're so embedded in logic one, it's not even worth thinking about purpose. And it's absolutely not true. It's not this, there's like, oh, our stakeholders wouldn't buy it. It's like, well, that's okay. You can be purpose-driven is an intention to act in a way that optimizes long-term well-being for all through something very strategic. You can be that, even though nothing else is, as long as you're really clear, where are you in relation to that? What would it look like if you got there? And the standards are written in governance behaviors and management behaviors, so they're really practically focused, but only to a level that's relevant for everyone. You then have to work out what that means for you, and having subgroups of practice to work through those details. Well, how would I approach that clause that says, I have to govern my culture so that it's, aligned with my purpose?
So I'm thinking of like a company executive or a board of directors. Well, I'm just sort of thinking of the budget or the strategy. The strategy, purpose-driven company has a strategy, and then in that strategy, it's going to cost X million to do this product on their purpose, or Y million to partner with an NGO on some aspect of the purpose. So it's cost X million dollars. And then that goes into the budget. It's basically foregone capital, foregone revenue, because you're investing in your purpose. Like, isn't that practically speaking how that would go? Like, if you decide to put X million in your purpose, an investment, R&D, a new product launch, you're for a period of time, you don't have that excess capital.
At the end of the day, governance direction is what's our goal within what parameters, and strategy is merely how do I achieve the goal within the parameters in the dynamic context that I face. So unless you're clear about your goal and parameters, you can't even have a conversation about strategy, although that happens everywhere, right? But once you're clear about those things, the strategy is essentially the allocation of the resources that you have to bear, of which financial capital will be one of those resources that you are bringing to bear. So strategy is this: we have choices about how to achieve our goal within our parameters, and this is how, and we have resources, capitals, of which one is a pot of financial capital, that we have to decide how to allocate in order to not return a greater amount, that money, because that's not our purpose, to return it at a sufficient amount that we can pay the bills, meet the expectations, and invest in the purpose, but the objective being to invest in the purpose. So the strategic conversation should be, does this optimize our objective? Optimizing being the word in this context. Well, if we did that, that would do a better job than this, wouldn't it? Yeah, but that would meet this, this, and this. And that's why having that, again, I won't go into the details here, and I'm sure you all know it, but that strategic scoping, where you strategically scope your purpose, where you then bring that more to life at greater and greater levels of scoping through, through your vision and your mission, and then your strategic objectives, which, especially if in your large companies, what executives then go and deliver. That is what shapes the decisions that then are made about how you wield and unleash that capital resource that you have. Essentially, ISO is just our most highly refined consensus building process in the world, in that it involves the largest number of people, it has the most participatory approach. The failings that might result in an ISO come from the ability of national member bodies to engage and bring the wisdom of those communities in. And that's for us to change. So we can't say that the ISO is going to be Western. That's our choice. My question is, how are you doing it? Because I'm just there to facilitate the process and help create an opportunity for all of us to make it happen. And I'm not used to doing this, but I'm going to plug the fact that I'm writing a book. Sparks are promoting it, the wonderful Sparks Publishing. We have a LinkedIn site where we're trying to bring people in to also, if we have questions while we're writing the book, and that might be also a place where you can bring some of these questions in. We want to keep it alive anyway, so Hamish and Alex are the people to talk to, but it's a LinkedIn group. Beyond Profit is what it's going to be called.
Everybody, can you see why we just want to spend as much time as we can with Victoria, and we want to know when she's coming back? We don't have another T-shirt for you, but
I don't need any more T-shirts.
See what we can do.